Hello, lovelies. You're listening to episode 64 of the Broken Enchantments podcast, written and read by Elizabeth Wheatley. That's me. I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Be sure to check out my Patreon for next week's episode, now available. You can check out the links below. Happy listening. I'm not sure we should be here, Janir protested.
Shh! If we get caught, tell everyone it was my idea. My father will be disappointed in me, but that's nothing new. Agreed?
Gowther gave a pert snap of his chin without waiting for a response. It was the first show of imperiousness Janir had seen from the young nobleman yet. Karile nodded, crouching lower to have a better view through the peephole.
Sounds fair enough.
Janir bit her lip. Hadn't Karile once confessed he got her into more trouble than she knew what to do with? Why did they need to spy in the first place? Wouldn't they hear the results of this meeting soon enough as it was? They were in a laird slug, a small alcove in the wall of Lord Kessam's audience chamber. Gowther had found Karile and Janir in the library and asked them if they would like to attend the meeting of the High Lords. Janir hadn't realized until he brought them that they weren't supposed to be present. Janir appeared to be alone in her reservations. Karile peered shamelessly into the audience chamber, crouching and squinting for a better view. Tiny peepholes disguised as designs in the masonry dotted one side. The hideaway was more than a little dusty, as it had most likely been years since it had last been cleaned, but it still afforded them a fine view. Gowther's marriage had been of some import. All the High Lords and many other lesser lords had arrived for the occasion. They had come to celebrate a wedding and instead found themselves addressing an abduction. Lord Kayerson sat at the table with shoulders rounded. His golden, emerald-studded circlet threatened to slip off his head. Beside him was Lord Relatiman, Gwenna's father, donning mask of neutrality as he discussed their next course of action. Several of the High Lords sat with their backs to Karile, Janir, and Gowther, but their slanted postures and heavy exhales belied they were just as weary. All the High Lords were present save for the High King, who was supposed to arrive in a week. Janir had heard that terms of Gwenna's release had been delivered through a rather shaken shepherd boy. That was all she knew for certain. The chair of House Vergard, usually occupied by the High King, was now taken up by his nephew, a man of Armandius's generation with a dark beard and grave expression. The High Lords were mostly alone in the room, save for one or two attendants, 3 very familiar elves, and a man in his late 20s who stood behind the seat of Lord Meliard. Karile had pointed the younger man out as Sir Drianar, the younger brother of Janir's mother. Janir wondered if she had ever met him. More than that, she wondered if he hated her, as Karile said her grandfather did.
Do we know where Lady Gwenna was taken?
Lord Vergard began. Armandius responded in a monotone.
It is possible she was moved to the city of Valmaken, but we have no way of knowing for certain. Why my daughter?
Lord Relatiman demanded abruptly, clearing his throat an instant later.
My lord.
Relatiman batted away his valet.
No. Why would they take Lady Gwenna if they wanted a prisoner exchange? A princess for a future High Lady hardly seems adequate.
Armandius lowered his gaze.
Do you have nothing to say, Lord Kayerson?
Kessam's tone was laced with accusation. He offhandedly flicked a weathered parchment across the table.
The ransom demand was addressed to you. It does make one wonder. What?
Armandius's sharp eyes cut into Kessam.
What does it make one wonder?
Relatiman straightened.
That is my daughter.
Ignoring Relatiman, Kessam was undaunted by Armandius's challenge.
Her ladyship was in your care for several months.
Those of a more scandalous mind might speculate. Armandius's fists slammed down on the thick wooden table, rattling the whole thing.
You insult my honor and that of the Lady Gwenna.
Velasquez and Lord Dulmarst, the lord of the Dawn Plains, stepped forward and spoke quickly to Armandius. At their words, he leaned back into his chair, but said nothing. Kessam himself sat straight as a reed, blinking at Kayerson. Janir had a feeling that there was more to the sudden eruption than Kessam's allegations. As soon as Armandius had taken a breath, Sir Drianar spoke. He spoke quickly, as if attempting to put as many words as possible between that exchange and the present.
We all have the utmost faith in the word of Lord Kayerson and the honor of Lord Reladaman's daughter.
Janir thought it rather crass for a future father-in-law to imply Gwenna had bedded another High Lord, in a room full of witnesses, including the bride's father, no less.
Drianar continued. We came here to discuss our next course of action. The Lady Gwenna must be recovered. In that much, we agree.
There were nods from around the table. Beside Janir, Karile shifted in anticipation.
What we have not decided is in what manner this should be handled. They wish to trade the Argetallum girl for Lady Gwenna.
Drianar didn't even speak Janir's name. Janir's heart seized. The Argetallams were bartering to get her back? Visions of black rods, black welts, and black dungeons flashed before her. If she could have forgotten anything, why couldn't it have been that? Karile patted her arm in the dark.
It seems a suspiciously straightforward trade,
Lord Orsmar remarked.
Seovan spoke calmly, but his lips pressed between breaths. You would hand over the savior of Brevia. She is the only reason the city yet stands.
Janir had never been called the savior of Brevia, but it felt wrong, like a crown too heavy for her head.
Having an Argetallum allied to us could be beneficial, Dulmarst pointed out. If we ever experience something such as the Enchanter's uprising of King Corbert's reign, we will have the solution.
These people were horrible. Armandius made to speak, but then sharply clamped his mouth shut. His knuckles whitened around the armrests of his chair. Drianar drew a breath.
Do you think the Argetallams expect their terms to be met? Could this be a ruse, whilst they have some other motive? They breed their women like dogs.
Lord Kessam grumbled.
One with magic would be even more valuable.
Janir covered her face with her hands. Gwenna had done nothing. An innocent woman had been taken captive for ransom because of a traitorous princess.
It's all right, Janir,
Karile whispered. Lord Reladaman's jaw tensed, but he said nothing. The valet at his shoulder fidgeted uncomfortably.
What of a rescue?
Drianar suggested.
What of it? As it is, we have no means of finding her.
Lord Dulmarst leaned back, shaking his head.
And what of a contingent of spellcasters? Are there any in the temples of our cities who could perform a seeking rite?
Lord Reladaman asked. There was a slight waver to those words.
It is possible,
Lord Kessam conceded.
I will send the order to the temple immediately. We shall have to hope that she is as yet intact.
Janir stifled a groan. He was worried about Gwenna's maidenhood. In all of this, that was his concern.
Regardless, the marriage is off,
Reladaman said with an iciness that set Janir on edge. He rose, whirling on his ally.
That you would insult my daughter, and show such little regard for... my lord.
Reladaman's valet flustered, grabbing his master's shoulder as if to restrain him. Janir did not think meetings of High Lords were meant to be this aggressive. Behind the tapestry, Gowther shook his head, a pained look on his pinched face.
My lords, I mean no disrespect, either to the House of Kessim or the House of Reladaman, but I believe every option given us is flawed.
Young Lord Vergard did sound reluctant to be the one to say it, but no one could protest that it was true. No one agreed, but no one argued either.
I will retrieve the lady, Armandius said flatly. I swore to see her safely here. I shall see that task finished. You don't know who has her. You don't even know where, Dulmarst pointed out.
Armandius cast him a dire glare.
No, but I shall discover.
He turned a humble bow to his left.
Lord Reladaman, I have failed you, and your house, but if it costs my last breath, I shall make this right.
Janir closed her eyes, thinking. If Zhamarza was attacking, it must mean that the Argetallams were still close by and at work. The chalice had been destroyed, she was sure of it, but if they were still at large, there could still be a war. Reports had come that Valmakan appeared vacated, but that could mean anything. Seovan stood with his father and Luana, looking as grim as every other soul in the room. His aunt Luana was sword-wed, one of the elf women who had married her sword in service of her king. Velasquez was an ambassador, but a warrior as well. From that bloodline, Seovan could be nothing but a soldier. If war, a real war, came, he would be in the thick of the fray.
I have some familiarity with this particular enchantress, Armandius calmly stated.
Janir didn't bother to question what that meant.
And with Argetallams. But if you will lead men against her, you have no means of protecting them from her magic, save enchanters, and no way of protecting them from Argetallams, Lord Reladaman pointed out.
Though he was right, it seemed counterintuitive to argue against your own daughter's rescue.
I will do what I must,
Armandius said quietly.
I understand that this is a council, and I respect that. But I will not leave Lady Gwenna to her fate, any more than I shall permit my daughter to be sacrificed. Your ward, Lord Kessim interrupted. The traitor to her own people. In fairness, she did save our lives,
Lord Dulmarst interjected. Janir wondered how much he feared that enchanter uprising he mentioned.
That is the only reason I have not suggested the trade myself,
Lord Vergard put in. Lord Kessim was unmoved.
She is a liability nonetheless, worth even less than a despoiled noblewoman.
Despite Armandius's flaring nostrils, it was Reladaman who bolted to his feet.
You bulbous mass of...
I'll fight her. The words seemed to break from Janir of their own will, sounding through the whole council chamber like a battle cry. The High Lords jumped, and even the elves looked surprised. Every head snapped in Janir's direction.
Who's there?
Lord Kessim demanded.
Show yourself,
Lord Dulmarst barked. Janir gulped. If she didn't show herself, they would come looking for her, and it would be far worse to be dragged out. Janir gathered her skirts and rose. Gowther and Karile shot her glares, but she didn't have time to apologize. Janir shoved out from behind the tapestry, and several swords were almost instantly leveled in her direction. Her hands shot up level with her face, wishing she'd kept her mouth shut.
Janir.
Seovan was first to speak. What were you doing?
The Argetallum. Spying.
Lord Meliard twisted in his seat, weathered form springing to life. He had not spoken thus far, and the man appeared so frail that a breeze could blow him away. His joints knotted under his skin, and his hands were gnarled as old tree roots.
I've told you, she's...
A fit of coughing swallowed up the old man's words before he could continue. Draenor leaned down to help his father. Armandius strode to Janir and seized her arm.
What are you doing here? He demanded through gritted teeth.
Let me help, Janir pleaded. Armandius didn't reply. He dragged her toward the door. Janir wrenched her arm free. I'm your only chance against Zhamarza.
Janir,
Armandius swallowed. I will deal with you later.
I thought this was your private council chamber, Lord Kessam,
Reladaman snidely commented. Kessam responded with a seething glare. Janir ignored them. There will be Argetallams, too. You might fight your way through them, but then what?
This is not up for discussion,
Armandius snapped. We need to discuss it.
Janir's right.
Karile emerged from behind the tapestry, his overlarge robe covered in dust.
Lord Kierson, sacrificing yourself is noble. Who are you to advise me, boy?
Armandius snarled.
Where are these people coming from?
Lord Dulmarst asked of no one in particular.
Gowther!
Lord Kessam snarled, pounding his fist against the table. Sir Gowther appeared, awkwardly bullying his way free of the wall hanging.
Another one?
Lord Reladaman said, glancing sideways to Kessam.
Private indeed.
Kessam fumed at his son.
Why, you... Janir, we have no defense against Zhamarza,
Armandius insisted. Janir passionately shook her head.
You have me.
No, was all Armandius said.
But I can...
No, Armandius shouted, his voice blasting in her face like a lion's roar.
The girl does have a point,
Lord Orsmar conceded.
As noted, Enchanter's spells would be useless against her.
Armandius whirled around.
She is not coming, and that is final.
Don't you understand? They took Lady Gwenna to get to me. I can't let someone else die for me. Out of the corner of her eye, Seovan watched. He didn't try to argue with her, but he whispered hastily to Luana. The prospect of her going into Essence's new wear, much less against someone like Zhamarza, was no more appealing to her, but what choice was there?
She will have defenses that do not rely on magic, soldiers and most likely monsters trained as guard dogs.
That's your area of expertise, Janir countered.
You are 16 years old.
Armandius was furious, all the unhappy events of the past 36 hours adding up into a single mess of misery. Janir wasn't about to be swayed. I'm young, but I am not useless. Or defenseless. No one, not even Armandius, seemed to know what to say to that, but he was clearly making an effort to think of something. He glared down at her. If he was trying to be intimidating, Janir had faced worse. Meliard tried to speak, but another bout of coughing took his words. Velasquez stepped from around the table to stand beside Armandius. We will go with you. Armandius whirled on him.
Luana, Seovan, and I will accompany you to bring back Lady Gwenna and destroy the enchantress Zhamarza.
Velasquez glanced to the High Lords. I will send for my friend, Stalos. He will assist you with any problems you may incur in the wake of the attempted invasion. No one spoke. Does anyone object? Velasquez asked, raising his voice. Lord Dulmarst was the first to speak.
It seems the best option.
Even as he spoke, he scrutinized Janir closely. Perhaps he secretly hoped she'd die on this errand. Then it is settled, Velasquez announced. Lord Kierson, Princess Janir, Seovan, Luana, and myself will set out as soon as we may. He called her Princess Janir. She wasn't aware of him doing that before, and she wondered why he did now. Lord Gowther straightened his collar. He became awkward again the moment his father wasn't shouting at him.
You have been listening to Broken Enchantments, written and read by Elizabeth Wheatley. Don't forget to check out my Patreon for early access to episodes, bonus content, and lots of patrons-only freebies. You can learn more at elizabethwheatley.com. And don't forget to subscribe on your favorite podcast platform or YouTube. I'll see you next time.